Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. We're continuing on our pandemic projects. This one came in from a close friend of mine, a boyhood friend actually, and he kind of got the line trapped underneath the case, and he thinks some line is broken in there. Tells me that it's not moving, which it's not. He didn't mention he thought he took it apart, but I don't know what he might have done or not done with that. But at any rate, it gives us the opportunity to do a full service on this. This is the Avet. It's the SX model 5.3, and it's a nice braid reel. I call them braid reels. They're the smaller versions of the conventional reels. This one is a lever drag. It's in a round baitcaster format. It's got pretty much a solid frame, usually aluminum, and it's a fairly simple design. So we're going to get started on that, but before we do, I want to thank our first responders, emergency personnel, essential personnel, healthcare workers, and all who have done their part to keep us safe and to keep us out of harm's way during the pandemic. Your efforts truly are appreciated. And with back to school now, a special shout out to the teachers, who are many of them working remote, trying to get our children educated as they struggle with maintaining health and safety within that segment of the population. So thank you to all. Whenever you're going to work on a reel like this, I recommend getting a schematic. Even if you've worked on it before, it's just a good way to keep track of the pieces and the parts. I was able to go out onto the internet and get this schematic for this reel. And the schematic is going to show you a burst diagram. It's going to show you what you expect to see on the gear side, what the componentry is of the spool, which is the main player on a lever drag reel, and gives you part numbers here in case you want to order any or need to order any of those as you're going about doing this. This one was available on a website called Pursue the Outdoors. So if you need one of them, you can check out that site or simply do an internet search using one of the major search engines, and that'll tell you how to go find that. So I get the schematic. I glove myself up with a latex glove on the hand that's not my working hand. I have my parts tray right next to me here, and we're going to get started. So the first thing you want to do is remove the exterior pieces. Some of these reels have Torx for screws. In this case, it doesn't have a Torx screw. It has a straight Phillips head screw. And we're going to start by taking off the hold fast for the handle screw, or handle nut cap in this case. And we're going to take basically piece by piece. We'll take this reel apart, show you how it comes apart, we'll show you how it's made, and we'll show you in the event that you want to buy one of these, you'll see the componentry inside of it, and if you're servicing this reel, you'll see how to service it as we go along. This nut cap is an 11mm nut. Now let's get that off. That comes off in the traditional counterclockwise direction. And though this reel is clean, we are seeing evidence of where salt traps in it, and this is oops, there's an oops, the little shim washer just came off there. I'll pick that up in a moment. And this is a good thing to do, to take pictures along the way now. So we just took the handle off. I'll grab that shim washer before I forget about it. I have a solid plastic mat underneath here, and it's cleaned before I start, and that way if something falls down, generally it's pretty easy to pick it up. That solid mat is, I guess, what they used to use in offices under rolling chairs to help. So that was the washer that came out of the handle. It sits in that little groove there. That'll go into the parts tray. The handle will go into the parts tray. Next up then we have a washer with a kind of an indent here for the bearing. So pay attention to what side is the flat side and what side is the indent. For the ridge side goes in, kind of holds that tight for water intrusion. And then we have the bearing for the handle as well. So what I was saying before, it looks like the reel has been cleaned or at least flushed down, but on the inside here we do have evidence of the salt buildup, which kind of says that even though we're taking care to wash the reel down after use, we haven't had the reel serviced in a while. Okay, next up I like to take the preset adjuster off. This is again a counterclockwise. Be careful with this one now. It looks innocent enough, but there are two little pins in here. They call them detents, I believe, or detention pins. They sit on each side of these. These are, if you're not paying attention, these things are liable to just kind of scoot out. And if they scoot out, they're difficult to find because of their size. So I take that and I put that into my parts tray. I'll wipe that little grease off the spring here. And put that spring right back into that preset holder. And then you can usually just slide this off. Pay attention now. We have that little spring ridge here. It's a washer with a series of ridges in it. And on the back side, if you look at your schematic here, you'll see we have a couple of washers that ride underneath here. So pay attention as these come off. Just going to leave that handle assembly in place. There's no need to take any pieces off there. This is your preset adjuster. It usually just pulls right out. Just having a little bit of difficulty grabbing it. Alright, well, let's take that off from the other side then. I'm going to take the case out now. That has, I'm not sure if it's just the three of these that hold the case on, and these two bumps may not be part of the case assembly on this side, or they may be. So we're going to just loosen these up first. And I think the answer here is that you can get it. Here's why the reel wasn't turning. That braid came in underneath the bearing there. Let's get that out of there. And then in the back here, it got trapped underneath the pressure plate. And oh my gosh, that's probably why I couldn't pull the other thing out. Look at all that braid that's sitting in there right now. So it looked innocent enough. It looked like there was just a piece or two that maybe was trapped under there. As it turns out, this whole thing got consolidated and wrapped around, and Tom will be happy to know that it's a mess. So let me just put that down. I don't want any parts to fly. You can see we probably got a couple hundred yards of line here. This is kind of crazy. I don't know if I've ever seen a wrap like this, but somehow that line got trapped inside the spool. Oh my gosh, I got yards and yards and yards of this. Wow, still going. And we got more wrapped around the other side of this with that tensioner. So take your time on stuff like this. Don't rush the process. You don't need to. And make sure that you take into account all of the parts. This has got to be 20 yards of line wrapped around here. So I don't know what the battle was, what the fish was, or whatever the stuff was, but somebody didn't stop when they realized that this thing was cranked under here. They just kept on going and going. So usually you'll find just a little piece of line broken off in there. It's kind of like a piece of sand in your shoe or something. It's just an annoyance. In this case, this just stopped the reel, and we're still going on this. Wow. I can tell you honestly, I didn't expect to see all of this in there. But that's kind of the fun of doing reel repair too. You're never quite sure what you're going to find underneath. You have some initial guesses, but boy, in this case, that's one pile of line. So I will agree with Tom. It's not working because line's trapped in there. I think you guys get the idea. I'm going to shut this off and just keep winding. I'll be back. So that was interesting. We had all of this wrapped around the pinion gear and all of this wrapped around the anti-reverse gear. That's got to be 20 or 25 yards of braid. So we can honestly say braid's good in a lot of regards, but that would never happen with monofilament. You would only get 2 or 3 or 4 inches of monofilament in there before it jammed up the work. So this one did a good job. That's a world-class jam up there. Okay, so while we did that, the screws, I can't get rid of that stuff. Geez, trying to put that into a trash bin I have over here. While we did that, the 3 case screws fell out. So I'm going to take those case screws and put those over here. And then this is our pressure plate on this side, click ratchet on this side, clean where it needs to be clean. No more lines sitting under there. So we're in good condition with that. I noticed that there's a little bit of pitting or whatever going on the pressure plate here. So I'm going to take some steel wool first, see if I just can't polish it that way. And that's usually because that doesn't contact the washer there. And the salt starts to eat into that. I've seen some really bad Avets with the corrosion on that plate, but this one seems minor. I'm going to use some metal polish here. It's a chrome polish, automotive chrome polish. See if the small grit in there will help make a difference. It should. Okay, clean that off the bench, clean that off here. So we still have some minor pitting there. There's nothing you can do about that. I don't recommend it. Go replace the pressure plate at this point. It's not needed. We'll just grab our cotton swab, clean out the old grease inside, and I can say it's been a while since this one has been serviced by the view of the grease I have there. Okay, so we've cleaned up the pressure plate. While we're at it, we're going to come over here and remove the main gear. Now, in order to remove the main gear, you can do it a couple of different ways. This has got an eccentric clutch on it that helps with the anti-reverse. That's going to mesh into the back of this gear here. And let me show you how it works. It's kind of an interesting technology. So if you're spinning forward, driving your gear, this one needs grease. I can just tell you're doing fine. As soon as you go to back it off, there's a friction element here that pushes, well, I guess I'm driving it the wrong way. We're fine here. As soon as you go to back it off, there's a friction element that pulls the dog down and engages in those ridges in the back. So this dog is not spring driven. This is the business end of it over here. You could take that off if you wanted to. You don't need to. The easiest way to service this main gear is to leave that piece on there. Take the 2 side plate screws off here. That's holding the dog assembly in place. I'll lay them on the table for a moment here. And they can go into my parts tray. Take the little cover off. And there's your dog. So you can push the whole assembly up now and that dog will come out. Note to self, take a picture here. Like you see, the dog just came off. That's the orientation of the dog. And that's the orientation of the swing arm. The swing arm is up and over and around. It is so easy with these reels to get them flipped, get this thing going in that direction, and then you're sitting there trying to figure out how in the world does it belong. Well, it belongs just as we've shown you. That goes under the lip, over to the side, and the dog sits on that. So take a note here. It's very important with the orientation later. Main gear is out. The dog is out. Pull the spool gear because there's a mess behind there. I don't know how much of that mess is lack of maintenance and how much of that mess is from all of that braid that got trapped back there. But let's start with the cotton swab. You have a sealed bearing in this, so you really don't need to do anything with that bearing other than get it cleaned, as we just did there. Clean the case out and get rid of all of that old grease that's in there. You can see how it's just accumulated. Nice green color. You can see where the dirt is off of this green color, that's for sure. And just use a paper towel to get what little excess may remain on there. Okay, there we go. So this is part one. Part two now is the main gear. We have a bearing, we have a sleeve, we have a bearing. With any strength I could pull off. There we go. Then you can pull the main gear off. Then we have that little assembly there that I'm going to leave just like that because that contains the proper orientation. There's a bearing shield that goes here. And there's a square that's going to sit on that side. So it's hard to confuse the orientation of that main gear. Square goes in the back. Clean all of that up with a paper towel. I like to go with the least abrasive piece for cleaning that I can. Check the teeth on the main gear. These are clear. If you felt like you had clogged channels, go ahead and take either a brass brush like this one or a fabric brush and just clean any debris that might be inside that gear. These are pretty darn clear. And then we can go ahead and put that back together so that we can reinstall this side. I like to work on pieces of a reel. I don't like to spread it all out at once. I'm going to, while I have this in my hand, I'm going to go ahead and put some reel grease on there. Yeah, it's an Avet reel. I'm going to use pen reel grease. My take on it is reel greases are pretty much the same and do not need to have a manufacturer-specific reel grease. The manufacturers don't make the grease. Chemical companies do when they put it on there under their label. But if you're satisfied with one and you have good results with it, just kind of leave it at that. All right, make sure you seat the square properly. And we've got the bearing washer goes on there. Then the bearing, check the operation of the bearing. Now, it's sealed. Shouldn't matter that with any kind of lubrication, but I'll put oil on there, it won't hurt it. And we can put the bearing back on, and we can put the sleeve, just a little bit of grease on here. I'm going to put a little bit of grease under the sleeve here. Put the sleeve back on. That's your main gear assembly, and we can go ahead and we can reinstall. Everything is clear in the channel here. We have the orientation right on the swing arm. We're going to go ahead and seat that all. I'm going to take the dog. The dog is going to sit that way. We want to get the dog hooked over that little stud of that carrying arm. Kind of hard doing this for the camera and for myself here. But we have it. And then again, just test the operation of it. As long as you're cranking, oh, it came off the ride. There we go. As long as you're cranking in the take the reel in position, you're fine. As soon as you go to drive that, I'm just going to check that dog may be upside down. Nope, that dog is. So this is where it's good to go back to pictures. So I'm just going to stop for a moment. Actually, I'm looking at the schematic right now, and it tells me that I have that dog upside down. So let's go ahead and just readjust that. The point goes down on this. So I'm just going to hold everything and reset that. Like that. There we go. So point is down on this, and we can grab our cover. This is where the parts tray helps. You know where to go for your pieces and your parts. Grab one of those small screws. Get that one started. Grab the other one. These are stainless, so unfortunately it doesn't work with my magnetic tip, but that's okay, we're close enough with these. Right, so that's rebuilding the drive side. You've oiled your bearing, you've oiled the main gear. We've got our spool gear now, and we know that the spool gear was under some duress there with all of that line, so let's make sure that we don't have any broken line or residual in these channels. And let's make sure that that line that got trapped didn't bend the gear. It's very easy. These, even with high quality materials like these, it's easy to bend or chip a tooth, and it usually happens when something gets off center like this one did with all of that line in there. So let's just make sure we're in good condition. There we are. Let's go back then and do the same thing we do with the other one. Let's just get a good coating of grease on that. That's another reason to use those paper towels. You don't pick up any contaminants off your bench in the event that you drop something like this. So let's go put that one back in. Give it a spin just to make sure it's working properly. It is. And then if we back it off, that dog should come down, which it does. So this side is pretty much done. And we can actually go back and put the rest of the hardware on this side if we wanted to. All right, right now what we're going to do is we're going to shift gears and go over to the business end of the lever drag, which is all contained in the spool. So let's go ahead and take that rubber band off, pull the spool. Let's just clean up the back here. There's nothing you need to do on the back. This is a solid system here. You have a click mechanism that has a little bit of grease on it. Of course, if the springs were broken, if the click was worn, if you were doing anything like that, you could go in and replace that. You would pull the screw here, and that would drop the assembly down, and then you could unhook your springs and replace that click tongue. In this case, that's not needed. Okay, everything else happens on the other side of that frame. So here's the frame. We have our frame spool. We have our tension washers. I believe there's a bearing inside that carrier. Let's check. I'm not seeing one. It's good. This bearing's got to be on the other side of this spool piece. Oh, no, there it is. Okay, I'm going to pull the spring. I'm going to pull the bearing from the top side of this. There should be one more bearing in the case there. I pull all of this out. This is my assembly that's going to be driving the balance of this. That's where I hate braid. We have a carrier here. If you needed to remove that carrier, there's a metal spring here that would pull that out. But Avet has made these pretty easy. I believe this one also has the removable drag washer in it. Oh, maybe not. So Avet took to putting in single-sided disc for the lever drag wheels and gluing them to the spool. So I'm not even going to fiddle with this one. This one is in good condition. Avet also says this can run dry. It doesn't need to have lubrication on it, so I'm going to leave it dry. That's just following their practices and procedures. I have a spool bearing down there, which I'm going to put some oil on. And then we're just going to come over to this side. So again, pictures are important here, whether the pictures are that schematic that you pulled. You'll see up top there how that shaft runs, or take pictures with your cell phone or your digital camera or anything else for that matter, because it's very easy to get out of sequence with this assembly, and it doesn't work right if you're out of sequence. There's a long collar, there's a bearing, there's a back end shield to the bearing, and then there's 3 or 4 of these concave tension washers. Now, you don't do anything with the tension washers. I really took that off as an illustration, but also just to make sure that everything was clean underneath. We know that we had the broken line there. We don't want to find out after all of the hard work that there was some broken line caught in a collar or something underneath the spool. Okay, you can put a light coating of grease on there. You don't want to put too much on because it'll just get compressed and slide off. The tolerances are that tight. Just check for fit. All right, we're going to put that collar back on for the bearing. Test the bearing. I just like to hold the center of it, spin it, make sure that I don't hear anything funny. Flood that with oil. Reinstall. Collar back on. Set that assembly inside the spool. Now, we already oiled the bearing in the spool. You could pop that bearing out if you wanted to. It's actually coming out right now, by the way. I just hit it with the comes that braid wrapping again. Just looking for the rubber band I took off. Probably just cavalier to myself, discarded it, and then this stuff is tripping. So we're going to put it over there. He'll never get it off. He's going to have to cut it to get it off. But I'm going to do that so I don't have to cut things. Okay, we're all the way through with this now. The back end, the T on the carrier goes into the shaft there. And sometimes you have to line it up visually, so sometimes it takes a little bit longer than others. There we go. We're in now. You can give it a spin just to make sure that's what you're doing. All right, we had a spring. It goes between the bearings, and we had a second bearing. Let's make sure it's sealed again, but we can make sure we get some oil on there. Then we have our pressure plate, which carries that bearing, so you can actually put that into the pressure plate here, just like that. Okay, so let's reassemble then. We put the bearing into the pressure plate. I just test fitted the spool gear to the back of the pressure plate. I'm going to put that in next. You want to make sure that your dog is in the up position here. That way it'll be away from the click ratchet and you won't have to worry about hitting that on the reinstall. All right, and then I'm looking down on my desk here. I have a small washer that could give you the chills, but that I just looked at the schematic, and that belongs here between the spring and the bearing. So let's go ahead and put that on. Then we can take the whole assembly and we should be able to get that on now. Then you need to hold pressure down while you're doing that so that you can put the 3 side plate screws in. It's kind of a balancing act here, but generally you can use your eyes to line them up. So this is a nice reel. It's compact. There's not a lot going on relative to lever drags in the sense that there's not a lot of moving parts, which I think is what makes this reel so good, is that you just don't have all of that stuff kind of complicating life. All right, so we have now, we're going to turn our attention back to the reinstall here. We have the arm that goes on, and that was about there. I always try to pay attention to where the arm goes. We have our preset button. Remember those two little detents there. I'm not going to take them out because I'm liable to lose them, but there's two little studs. They do ride in the channel there. Those are not part of the assembly. Don't lose them. And just tighten that up now. Okay. Next up, we had the bearing shield and washer that goes on the bottom for the handle. Then we had the handle. And that pesky little piece of metal that fell out at the beginning of this video, for those of you that were wondering if I was ever going to put it back on, I am. Now our handle cap nut. Just be careful. You have to get these threaded right. If you don't get them started right, you're liable to strip them. And if you strip them, you got a lot of replacing to do. I felt it grab there. Let's see. Yep, there you go. Must have been a little burr or something on the shaft. Let's tighten that up. We have our retention clip. I like that, it lined right up. So chances of that happening. I have my two little set screws here, which were the first pieces we took off. And those have a little salt on them, so I'm just going to put some oil on there. I don't want them to lock down and cause a problem the next time we go to use to service this reel. And one on each side. And we'll give it the test. We'll see if we get lucky on the first one in terms of being able to have the free spool the way we want it. Maybe, maybe not. Usually get pretty good with the Avets, especially if you know where you had it when you started. So it's time for the test drive then. We've just completed the putting that little collar back on. We're in free spool mode. I dropped it down. Usually you can get it the first time, and that's what Avets are known for. You can cast this thing a mile. It's just a beautiful, beautiful spin. As you notice, I took the rubber band off here. Would impede the things. All right, so there you go. First strike. Cranking away. Second strike. Tighter than tight. It's the way the reel should be working. A whole lot better without all of that broken braid in there. All right, so if you like the video, please indicate that. If you have a question on this reel or any reel in particular, if you're stuck on a project or whatever, then please contact me through the comments. I'll try and get you unstuck. And finally, if you have a reel that you would like serviced, well, I do that too by mail. So if you contact me by the email on a business card that follows, I'll be happy to provide you with the service information. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Have a great day. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.